I think we should, of course, take appropriate note of the backdrop against which this Caribbean Week is occurring, and that is, of course, where we are seeing collectively as a region um, rapid growth in arrivals. For 2014, where arrivals grew by 5.3% to 26.3 million visitors, we have bolted out of the gates with a 6% increase in arrivals over the first quarter of 2014. So I think it's fair to say that we are well into recovery mode. We all know what happened in 2008 and the challenges that we've had recently with Caribbean tourism. But we've reached a point now where we estimate 7.9 million visitors to the Caribbean for the first 3 months. And this is the fifth consecutive year in which arrivals grew during the first quarter, and of course, the 17th quarter of continuous growth. The US, of course, continues to be the most productive in terms of arrivals, with an increase by 5.6%. The Canadian market, of course, also grew by an equally impressive 5.4%. Of course, Cuba and the Dominican Republic are recording the highest levels of arrivals. In the accommodation sector, all leading hotel performance indicators were positive. There was a modest 1.3% in number of room available for the first quarter of this year, the largest increase for this quarter in the last 7 years. We also saw historically first quarter highs recorded for room occupancy, 77.8%. The ADRs, the average daily rate of $239.84 US dollars, and of course the RevPARs, the revenue per available room, were US $188.25. So we still getting good rates of return, and we still have a bit of capacity there since our occupancy is at 77.8%. So there's still some room. There's still some room for growth in that regard. I will also mention that investment levels are actually significantly up in the region, and new hotel plant or refurbishment of existing plant is occurring throughout the region. Cruise passenger arrivals slowed in the first quarter, with the Caribbean registering a 3.4% increase as opposed to 4.3% over a similar period in 2014. In 2014 over 2013, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. That would, of course, put us at 8.6 million cruise passengers visiting the region in the first quarter. The destinations that have seen the largest increases: Martinique, 34.2%, Puerto Rico, 26.2%, Antigua and Barbuda, 18.6%, and Jamaica, 15.9%. The outlook for the remainder of the year is quite positive. Growth is expected to be moderate and uneven among member countries. However, overall tourist arrivals are now anticipated to rise at least 6% over 2014. In the cruise sector, the momentum gained in the first quarter could be reduced. Of course, as you know, towards the middle of the year, vessels tend to reposition to the other side of the Atlantic, the Mediterranean and so on, and we anticipate that. But overall, we can see that there's no lack of tonnage being committed by the cruise sector to the region. In fact, what we are seeing is that with the larger vessels, there may be fewer calls but more passengers. And that is just a trend that we're seeing with all of the major cruise lines, but they are still a significant commitment of tonnage to the region. So it was against that backdrop that the Council of Ministers, and for that matter, the Board of Directors of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, met in this very room where we are, and we were able to discuss how we can sustain these gains and build on them and how we can do it in a way that it is long lasting. So we have, of course, considered numerous initiatives. We had some very useful exchanges. Sustainability, of course, not only meaning how we treat our ecosystems. And we heard about the initiative that CTO has embarked upon, the Sustainable Development Area of the Americas, and Selena went through that earlier. But beyond that, of course, is the economic sustainability. And for that reason, we are looking at new markets for the Caribbean. We had an extensive discussion about Latin America, and in particular, the big player in Latin America, which is Brazil. Some definite potential there for offering the warm weather vacation experience of the Caribbean to Brazilians. There is some direct flights occurring right now, and the Caribbean is becoming a popular option for uh, for Brazilian vacation seekers, and we will continue to develop that. So I think that there's a move on the part of the Caribbean to look beyond our traditional source markets, Asia as well, and again the big player in Asia obviously would be China. So we are looking to see how we can cooperate via the various fora that CTO possess, that we can better leverage these possibilities and in essence put the tourism industry of the region on a more sustainable footing. If you're offering tourism services to the world, you need to indeed offer them to the world and not just to the US, the UK, and Canada, and a few countries in Europe. So that is where the emerging economies of Latin America and Asia come in, and the sustained effort that we're making to get more business out of those markets. The other thing, of course, is that with respect to our existing markets as well, we we um, we work very hard as tourism destinations to try to attract airlift, because that is the only way you can really get long stay visitors to the Caribbean, other than, well, if you own your own yacht. But you can't take a train or catch a bus or drive to the Caribbean. You have to fly. And of course, at considerable expenses to our governments, we have to support airlift. If it's not a revenue guarantee arrangement, what they call a MRG, a minimum revenue guarantee, it is some form of seat subsidy, or indeed the so-called co-op marketing initiatives. But co-op marketing is really just it's another form of a subsidy. So we have found that we definitely need to explore greater use of collectively going to the airlines. The example of how Barbados and Tobago have been working with Gall to actually have a Brazil flight that now does a double drop in Scarborough, Tobago, and Bridgetown, Barbados. And there was a definite feeling that we can do some more work together. I believe Martinique and Suriname are doing some things together, and there's more scope for that kind of work, and in essence also allowing us to more creatively get our tourism services offered to the world. Because if you can have more airlift connections, you can then get greater movement to the region. The other thing that we discussed, which is very closely related to that, because if you're talking about a multi-destination vacation, you have to be able to get around within the region. It is still a bit of a challenge. And the Caribbean Tourism Organization is going to work with the providers of airlift within the region, LIAT, Cape Air, Seabourn, all of them. In fact, we have an aviation task force that's been doing some very good work for the CTO in terms of how we can facilitate better movement. But equally as important is the issues of seamless travel in the region. There are actually islands in the Caribbean, because I suppose of their previous colonial links, where you literally need a visa to travel within the region. And we have to work on eliminating, bringing down some of those barriers. Even this issue of filling in immigration forms, and what we can do, which we successfully did when we hosted the Cricket World Cup in 2007, albeit only with 9 countries. What can we do to allow for easier movement within the Caribbean region. And CTO is going to be working with the regional security system, working with the various immigration authorities and seeing if there's anything we can do to make that easier, to make it a little less difficult for persons who are coming in the region as well and would want to have a multi destination experience. Everyone doesn't like cruises. Cruises are popular, but some people would not mind flying between the islands, and it's our job to make that easier. The other reality is to get to some of our CTO members, you do have to use intra-regional carrier because all of the islands do not have uh, international airports, or should I say airports that can take the wide-bodied aircraft and so that come in from the major cities from outside of the region. So it's important to have a network of an airline network that is intense enough that our visitors, and for that matter, our citizens of the Caribbean can get around. It's important, and that's something that we will continue to work with. One of the other things that did come up very strong, and the Secretary General alluded to it when he outlined the specific objectives, is that the diaspora in this New York area, and indeed the whole of the U.S., they want to be more involved in this whole process of attracting visitors to the region, and for that matter, the development of the region. And I can assure you that we had a diaspora forum, which has become a traditional part of the Caribbean Week, but we are looking at initiatives, and the message from the council to the organization is clear that we must integrate and involve the diaspora in a more meaningful way when we come back to Caribbean Week 2016. And I can look forward to that. And by that, I don't necessarily mean throwing a wonderful concert somewhere and inviting a few artists and having a good time, but also assisting members as they try to facilitate, should we say, facilitate the development and how better to leverage this tremendous resource that we have. Large numbers of Caribbean citizens, even in this tri-state area here alone, and many of them positioned quite in quite influential places, and we need to take better advantage of that. They want to be involved, and of course we, those of us in government in the region, have got to facilitate it, and the CTO has to be a catalyst in that whole process. So that came through, of course, very strong, and we look forward to seeing that. With respect to the Caribbean Week as well, we think that there may be some other things that could possibly be changed as well, and it may even impact this very event that we're having, not in a negative way, but there's a view that there are a few things we can look at going forward as far as Caribbean Week and what we have to do. Before I allow those of you here to ask some questions, I'm going to probably preempt a few of you in here, and I will discuss a subject matter that did come up, and of course the Secretary General alluded to it, and that is Cuba has become very topical right now. And so rather than wait for you to ask, I would tell you, Cuba is not a problem for the CTO or the Caribbean. We are not afraid of what is happening in Cuba. As a matter of fact, Cuba is a member of the Caribbean Tourism Organization and has been for some time. There was even an occasion, not recently, when a Cuban Minister of Tourism attended Caribbean Week. It was a few years ago, but he was given a visa to come to this country because of Cuba's membership with the CTO. So whereas this whole idea of visiting Cuba is new for Americans, it is not new at all for any of us. In fact, Cuba get more tourists per year than anyone else in the Caribbean except the Dominican Republic. And if you want to know the numbers, it's north of 3 million. So we are not talking about a country that is new to tourism at all. They don't get any Americans, but they get 3 million visitors. Cuba's largest source market is a major source market for all of us in the Caribbean. So we are already competing against Cuba. That largest source market, of course, is Canada. The Canadians love Cuba. And we are already trying to get business from Canada alongside of Cuba. So the competition from Cuba is not new. Where I'm from in Barbados, the United Kingdom is our largest source market. And so I have to compete against Cuba to get Brits because they are going to Cuba. And that is the simple reality. 56,000 rooms and 3 million tourists a year. Cuba is already a player in tourism. And for us in the CTO, and for those of us involved in tourism in the Caribbean, Cuba is not new. Now, you're saying, but the reality is that the US is where most of the tourists come to the Caribbean from. And now they have another option. Will that be a problem? The answer again is no, because the way we see it, if any of our members is able to attract visitors to the region, it's good for the region. More people coming to Cuba means more people coming to the Caribbean. And therefore, the natural thinking of us at the Caribbean Tourism Organization is that it can only augur well for us. Those persons who were previously not coming to the region that are now coming to the region via Cuba can only redound to our benefit. And we look forward, therefore, to seeing Cuba's full integration into this whole system of offering tourism services. I would say that the minister from Cuba is not here, but I had a good meeting with Minister Manuelo Marrero, yes. And in Haiti, only 3 weeks ago, I was there for the United Nations World Tourism Organization meetings. We have the Americas Director, Carlos Vogel, right here next to me. And, Minister Marrero made it quite clear that that they are not, in essence, doing anything any differently in terms of the Cuban experience. And they, in essence, are going to offer the services, yes, globally. And if Americans want to come, that's fine. But they're coming on Cuba's terms. And he made it very clear. And that is, of course, not surprising, and we welcome and we look forward to seeing the normalization, that's the term I'm using, of the Cuban situation. I like, however, to put a little dose of something called reality is also needed here, because people are talking about this Cuba thing as if it has been normalized. President Obama, Barack Obama, did all that he could do in terms of establishing diplomatic relations. I think there are enough US citizens in here who would have done civics in high school to know there's still something called the Houses of Congress. And there is something called the Helms-Burton Act, which the president cannot repeal. And certainly the mood of this Congress, which is controlled by the other party, and from what I can see is likely to happen after the next election, it is unlikely that the embargo against Cuba will go anywhere in a hurry, but and therefore the full normalization is still some time off. I'm not inserting myself in U.S. politics here. I'm just saying based on my observation, and I think that irrespective of who gets into the White House, it will still come down to what happens in Congress, and I'm not sure that we will see that full normalization in a hurry, but it will probably eventually have to happen as naturally as night follows day. And if it is not happening immediately, well, then we still have more time to consider and to work and to see how this normalization effort can continue. They are members of the CTO, and therefore they are our colleagues, and we see it that way.